When I look back on my life, it feels like a cracked mirror, shards of memory catching the light at odd angles, cutting me when I stare too long. The part of my story I'm about to tell you isn't one I share easily, but it sits at the root of everything that followed, and perhaps telling it is the only way I'll ever make peace with it. It begins in the quiet years after my 30th birthday, when I thought I had finally figured out what it meant to be a man, only to learn I was still a boy, clinging to illusions. Her name was Claire. I had known women before her, flings, some long, some short, none lasting, but she was different in ways I couldn't articulate at the time. She carried herself with a confidence that drew people like moths to a flame, yet there was always something guarded in her eyes, as though she were hiding behind glass walls no one else could see. I met her through work, a consulting project that forced us into long evenings and shared frustrations. Those evenings stretched into laughter, into dinners, into moments where the air between us became too heavy with possibility to ignore. I told myself it was fate, though in hindsight, it was something more dangerous: choice. I wasn't a fool. I knew she had a boyfriend, someone serious, a man she lived with. She didn't hide it, not at first. But the way she spoke of him was like someone describing a room they no longer lived in. Polite, familiar, but stripped of warmth. I should have stepped back, should have reminded myself that a woman spoken for is not a woman free, but my heart is a reckless thing. And when she leaned into me one night after too much wine, whispering that she didn't feel alive anymore, I let myself believe I could be the spark she was searching for. Our affair began in shadows. Hotel rooms, excuses, sudden silences when her phone lit up with his name. I told myself we were just two lost souls clinging to each other in a storm, but the truth was uglier. I was intoxicated by the secrecy, the thrill of being wanted in ways that felt stolen. Every kiss felt like a crime I wanted to commit again and again. Yet beneath the fire was a gnawing unease, a voice whispering that love built on lies has a habit of burning down its architects. The first fracture appeared when I saw her in the daylight of ordinary life. We had met for coffee on a Saturday morning, a rare chance to be in public together. I watched her scan the cafe, shoulders tight, as if everyone who walked past might know her secret. She laughed when she caught me noticing, but it was a brittle laugh, and for the first time I wondered if I was just another weight she was carrying rather than the liberation she claimed. Later that day, as we walked along the river, she told me she couldn't imagine her life without me, and the contradiction dug its claws into my chest. Was she lying to me, to him, or worst of all, to herself? I wanted clarity, but every time I pushed, she pulled me back with tenderness so raw it erased my doubts. She told me stories of her childhood, her dreams of escaping to another city, the way she sometimes stood in her apartment and pretended the walls weren't there. When she looked at me with that mixture of desperation and hope, I felt chosen, as though my love was the only thing keeping her afloat. It was intoxicating and terrifying, and I was too weak to let go. But secrets are heavy and they always leave marks. I began to notice small changes in myself, snapping at friends who asked too many questions, avoiding family gatherings, lying more easily than I ever thought I could. It was as if I was splitting into two versions of myself, the man I had been and the man she demanded I become. I told myself it was worth it, that real love required sacrifice, but deep down I knew I was becoming someone I barely recognized. The moment that sealed everything in motion came on a rainy night in November. We had just left a bar, tipsy and reckless, when she kissed me on a street corner without caring who saw. The world seemed to spin slower as headlights cut through the mist, and in that brief moment I thought maybe we could rewrite the rules. But then her phone rang. She froze, pulled away, answered in a voice I had never heard before, soft, practiced, affectionate. "Yes, I'll be home soon," she said, smiling at me in a way that didn't reach her eyes. That night, lying awake, I realized something I couldn't ignore. I wasn't just in love with her, I was in love with the illusion of her. And illusions, no matter how beautiful, have a way of shattering. The days that followed were restless, my thoughts tangled like wires sparking against each other. I tried to convince myself the unease was temporary, that once she left him, As she often hinted she would, things would settle into something resembling normal. But Claire never gave me a timeline, only vague assurances. Soon, just give me a little more time. Each promise was like a rope tossed across a chasm, but when I reached for it, the rope turned to smoke. Still, I clung to her words, because the alternative was admitting I had built my life around a lie. Then came the first betrayal, though I didn't see it as betrayal at the time. One evening, after weeks of excuses, she canceled our plans last minute. She claimed her boyfriend was sick, that she couldn't leave him alone. I accepted it, but later that night, unable to quiet the doubts gnawing at me, I drove past her apartment. I saw them through the window, laughing over dinner, his hand resting casually on hers. My chest felt like it had been pried open with a crowbar. It wasn't just the intimacy, it was the ease. The Claire I knew was restless, haunted, starved for escape. But the Claire I saw that night looked content at home, as if I had imagined the distance she swore existed between them. I didn't confront her, not right away. Instead, I let the anger fester, disguising it as patience. The next time we met, she was radiant, spinning some story about how suffocating her life felt, how she wished she could just disappear with me. I listened, nodded, even touched her face with a gentleness that surprised me. But behind my smile, my heart had hardened. A question whispered louder than ever. Was I the escape she craved, or just a convenient distraction? Eventually, I couldn't keep it inside. One night, as we lay tangled in sheets that smelled of her perfume and my guilt, I asked, "Do you love him?" The silence that followed was heavier than any answer she could have given. She finally whispered, "It's complicated." That phrase, so small, so cowardly, was the knife that sliced open my illusions. I realized then that her glass walls weren't built to keep others out. They were built to keep herself from being seen too clearly, and I was no exception. From that moment, my trust in her began to crumble. I scrutinized every word, every gesture, searching for signs of deceit. I noticed how quickly she tucked her phone away when we were together, how her stories never quite aligned, how she avoided introducing me to anyone from her circle. I told myself it was necessary secrecy, but deep down I knew better. I was the secret, and secrets once discovered are rarely cherished. The second betrayal arrived in the form of a message I was never meant to see. She had left her laptop open one afternoon while showering, and curiosity, or perhaps desperation, pushed me to glance at her emails. There it was, a thread with her boyfriend, full of affection and plans for a vacation they were about to take. Her words to him were tender, devoted, the kind she had once reserved for me. My stomach churned as I read line after line, each one tightening the noose of my denial. When she emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, smiling at me as though nothing in the world was amiss, I felt a strange detachment, as though I were watching a play where I already knew the tragic ending. I didn't confront her then, either. Instead, I played along, testing her with small traps, questions about her weekend, suggestions for trips she never committed to, invitations to meet friends she always declined. Each time she slipped through my fingers with practiced grace, and I realized she had been living this double life long before I entered it. I wasn't her first lie, and I wouldn't be her last. What kept me tethered, despite the betrayals, was the way she made me feel in those rare, unguarded moments. When she rested her head on my chest and sighed as if the world outside no longer existed, I believed, if only for a heartbeat, that she was mine. And perhaps that's the cruelest trick of love. It convinces you that fragments can be enough, that stolen hours can replace a lifetime. But deep down, I knew those moments were borrowed, and borrowed things must always be returned. The turning point came one winter evening. We were walking through a crowded holiday market, lights strung overhead like stars caught in a net. She held my hand tightly, her eyes darting as though she feared someone might recognize her. Suddenly, she spotted a man in the crowd, someone she knew, perhaps a colleague of her boyfriend's, and without warning she dropped my hand and stepped away, pretending to browse a stall of ornaments. The gesture was so sharp, so instinctive that it sliced through me. In that instant, I wasn't her partner or even her confidant. I was her liability. I left without saying goodbye, disappearing into the throng of strangers. She called me later, frantic, apologizing, saying she had panicked. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time, I saw our relationship for what it truly was, a house built on sand, waiting for the tide to erase it. After that night at the holiday market, a strange numbness settled over me. I still answered her calls, still met her when she asked, but something vital inside me had gone quiet. It was like being in a theater after the actors have left, sitting among the empty seats while echoes of their lines still cling to the air. Claire seemed to sense the change. She became more tender, more urgent, showering me with words that once would have disarmed me. But the spell was weakening. For every kiss, I remembered the sight of her hand slipping out of mine. For every whispered, "I need you," I recalled the emails to the man she promised to leave. My heart was no longer whole. It was splintered, suspicious, waiting for the next crack. That crack came sooner than I expected. She invited me to her apartment one afternoon, saying her boyfriend was away on business. It was the first time she had ever let me cross that particular threshold, and for a moment I believed it was a sign of trust. But walking through her door felt like trespassing into a life I didn't belong to. His shoes by the entrance, his books on the shelf, photographs of them smiling together on the mantel, evidence of a partnership she had sworn was dying. And there I was, sitting on his couch, drinking from his glass, pretending I wasn't a thief in someone else's home. Claire tried to make it feel normal. She cooked for me, played music, laughed too loudly. But I couldn't ignore the ghost of the man who lived there, the man who had been promised loyalty while I hid in the shadows. Later, as we lay in her bed, I asked her again, more directly this time, "When are you leaving him?" She turned away, staring at the ceiling, and said, "You don't understand, he needs me." It was a dagger straight through my chest. What about what I needed? What about the nights I stayed awake, wrestling with the shame of being her secret? What about the pieces of myself I had given to her freely, only to realize she had been rationing hers? She must have felt my body tense because she turned back and whispered, "Please, just trust me." But I had trusted her too many times already, and each time she had squandered it. The weeks that followed were a blur of arguments and reconciliations, of pulling away only to be pulled back in. I tried to end it twice, convinced I could no longer bear being her shadow, but each time she appeared at my door with tear-streaked cheeks and trembling hands, begging me not to abandon her. She knew my weakness. I couldn't stand to see her broken. So I stayed, though every time I did, I felt myself shrinking. Then came the unexpected twist, the one that still keeps me awake some nights. It wasn't her boyfriend who discovered us. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation with shouting and accusations. No, it was far quieter and far crueler. One evening, after she had fallen asleep beside me, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But temptation has a way of dressing itself as necessity. I unlocked it and saw a message from a name I didn't recognize. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you." My vision blurred as I scrolled, finding thread after thread, conversations laced with the same passion she once reserved for me. Another man. Not just her boyfriend, not just me, someone else entirely. The floor seemed to fall out from under me. All those moments I thought were ours alone, all those confessions and promises, had been part of a performance she was staging for more than one audience. I sat there in the dim glow of the screen, listening to her slow, steady breathing beside me, and felt my entire world collapse. Rage surged in my veins, but beneath it was something even worse: shame. I had believed I was her salvation, that I was special, chosen. But the truth was brutal. I was just another role she cast, another mask she wore to keep from facing herself. When she stirred awake and reached for me, I pulled away. She noticed instantly, eyes narrowing with that practiced alertness of someone who has lied for too long. "What's wrong?" she asked. My voice was calm, too calm, as I said, "Who is Daniel?" Her silence was deafening. She didn't cry, didn't protest, didn't even pretend not to know. She just looked at me with those glass wall eyes, and for the first time I saw her clearly. She wasn't lost or searching or trapped. She was choosing this, all of it. The lies, the betrayals, the games. It was her nature. I left that night without another word. She called, she texted, she showed up at my door, but I couldn't bear to see her face. Every time my phone lit up with her name, I felt a mix of longing and nausea. And yet, even in my fury, part of me ached for her because love doesn't dissolve neatly when betrayed. It lingers like smoke, clinging to your clothes even when the fire is out. But I knew something had ended. Not just our affair, but the version of myself that believed love could justify anything. That man was gone. What remained was someone harder, lonelier, and perhaps a little wiser, though wisdom bought at such a price feels more like punishment than reward. In the weeks after I discovered Daniel, life became a blur of silence and unanswered questions. Claire tried to reach me, but I ignored her calls, deleted her messages, and let her presence shrink into a ghost at the edges of my life. Still, I couldn't escape her completely. The memory of her voice, the shape of her laugh, the way she had once looked at me like I was the only man in the room, they clung to me like burrs I couldn't shake off. I thought cutting her out would bring me peace, but instead it left me hollow, as though I had amputated a limb and was learning to live with the phantom pain. It was around that time that I started drinking more than usual. Nights stretched long, and the quiet of my apartment became unbearable. Friends noticed, but I brushed them off with half smiles and tired excuses. I told myself I was moving on, but the truth was I was unraveling. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the moment I saw that message on her phone, those few words that shattered everything. Last night was amazing. I had been so sure I was her escape, her secret salvation. Instead, I was just another chapter in her book of betrayals. Eventually, though, grief gave way to anger, and anger in its strange way felt like progress. I told myself I had been a fool, that I had let her manipulate me, that she had never truly loved me. I tried to turn my memories into weapons, to sharpen each betrayal into proof that I had been nothing but a pawn. And for a while it worked. I felt lighter, convinced I had finally seen through her illusions. But anger is a brittle armor, it cracks under the weight of longing. And soon enough, I found myself answering when she called again. It was a cold night in February when I finally agreed to meet her. She insisted it would only be to talk, that she needed to explain. Against my better judgment, I went. We met in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one would recognize us. She looked different, tired, thinner, her confidence chipped away. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears, and for a brief, dangerous moment, I wanted to reach across the table and wipe them away. "I messed up," she said simply. "I didn't mean for it to get so complicated." I laughed, bitter and sharp. "Complicated? You were with him, with me, and with Daniel. That's not complicated, that's deceit." Her lips trembled, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted, but with you it was real. You have to believe that." The problem was, part of me still did. That was the cruelest trick of all. Despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayals, I still wanted to believe her. I still wanted to think our love had been something more than just another performance. But another part of me, the part still raw and aching, knew that if I believed her again, I'd only be signing up for more pain. We argued, voices rising until the barista shot us a warning look. She begged me to give her another chance, promised that this time would be different. She said she had ended things with Daniel, that she was ready to finally leave her boyfriend. Her words spun a familiar web, and I felt myself caught between the pull of old feelings and the weight of new scars. I wanted to hate her, but hatred requires certainty, and what I felt for Claire was anything but certain. In the end, I walked out without giving her an answer. The cold air slapped my face as I stepped onto the street, and I realized my hands were shaking. I told myself it was over, that I wouldn't let her draw me back into the labyrinth she carried around her heart. But the truth was, I was already back inside it. She had only needed a few words to unlock the door. The weeks that followed were a slow dance of relapse. We saw each other again, once, then twice, then more. Each time I told myself it would be the last, that I was strong enough to resist her, but strength has a way of evaporating in her presence. She knew exactly how to disarm me, how to find the cracks in my resolve. One touch, one whispered confession, and I was hers again. And yet, even in those moments of surrender, something had changed. The illusions were gone. I knew exactly who she was, and I knew the cost of loving her. But I couldn't stop. Loving her was like pressing on a bruise. I hated the pain, but I couldn't resist the pressure. Then came the night that sealed our fate. She showed up at my apartment unannounced, drenched from the rain, trembling with urgency. "I left him," she whispered the moment I opened the door. "It's over. It's really over." Her eyes burned with a conviction I hadn't seen before, and for the first time I believed her. She stayed the night, curled against me like someone finally freed from a cage. And for a fleeting moment I thought maybe this was it, the beginning of something real, something untangled from deceit. But deep down, a quiet voice reminded me of every lie, every betrayal, every time she had sworn things would change. I silenced it, choosing hope over caution, love over reason. And that choice, I would come to realize, was the most dangerous one of all. The first weeks after Claire left him were intoxicating, almost surreal. For the first time, there were no locked doors, no half-whispered phone calls, no need to flinch at shadows. We could walk through the city hand in hand without fear, eat dinner in crowded restaurants, even wake up together without her rushing out to make excuses. It felt like I had finally won the war I'd been fighting for years, that all the secrecy and anguish had led us to this triumph. She was mine now and I was hers, or so I told myself. But freedom has a way of exposing things that secrecy conceals. Without the thrill of stolen hours and the sharp edge of danger, our relationship was laid bare, and what I saw unsettled me. The intensity we once shared began to feel more like volatility. Small arguments flared into storms. Her restlessness, which I had once mistaken for passion, revealed itself as something more troubling, a hunger that could never quite be satisfied. I would catch her staring off into the distance, her smile faltering, and I'd feel a chill, as though she were already imagining a life beyond me. One evening I confronted her about it. "Are you happy now?" I asked, trying to keep the desperation from my voice. She looked at me with tired eyes, the kind of eyes that had carried too many secrets for too long. "I think so," she said softly. Then, after a pause, I thought it would feel different. Her words landed like stones in my chest. I wanted to shake her, to demand why nothing was ever enough. But instead, I held her because I was terrified that if I didn't, she might vanish altogether. Over time, the cracks widened. She grew distant, sometimes cold, other times excessively tender, as if to compensate for some invisible guilt. I found myself replaying old patterns, checking her phone when she wasn't looking, watching her reactions too closely, bracing for betrayal. Love, once my sanctuary, had become a battlefield of suspicion and fear. And the cruel irony was that I had no one to blame but myself. I had chosen this, chosen her, even after all the lies. The final twist came one spring afternoon when I returned home earlier than expected. I found her sitting on the couch, her face pale, her phone clutched in her hand. She looked at me as though I had caught her mid-crime, though she hadn't moved a muscle. "We need to talk," she whispered. I already knew. My chest tightened as she explained, haltingly, painfully, that she had met someone. Not Daniel, not her ex-boyfriend, but someone new. Someone who made her feel alive again, someone she hadn't meant to fall for. She cried as she spoke, saying she didn't want to hurt me, that she didn't understand why her heart kept chasing shadows. I listened in silence, numb. There was no rage this time, no desperate bargaining. Only a hollow acceptance, like the quiet after a storm has leveled a town. I realized then that betrayal wasn't the exception with Claire, it was her language, and I had spent years trying to translate it into love. When she left that day, suitcase in hand, I didn't stop her. I didn't even ask where she was going. I simply watched her walk out of my life, knowing she would leave fragments of herself scattered everywhere, fragments I would spend years trying to sweep away. The months that followed were brutal. The silence of my apartment felt cavernous, and I found myself haunted not just by her absence, but by the man I had become with her. A man who lied, who hid, who clung to illusions even when the truth was glaring. I had betrayed myself as much as she had betrayed me, and maybe that was the deepest wound of all. It took time, too much time, to begin rebuilding. Therapy, long conversations with friends I had neglected, long nights of reckoning with my own reflection. Slowly, I began to understand that what I had called love was something else entirely. Obsession, addiction, the compulsion to fix someone who had no desire to be fixed. Claire had been a mirror reflecting my own emptiness, and I had mistaken the reflection for connection. Even now, years later, I think of her sometimes. A song, a place, a face in the crowd will trigger her memory, and for a fleeting second I'll feel that old ache. But then I remind myself of the truth. Love is not supposed to feel like captivity. It is not supposed to leave you doubting your worth, scanning the horizon for the next betrayal. I tell this story not because I want pity or because I want to vilify her. I tell it because it reminds me who I am and who I refuse to become again. Claire was a chapter, yes, a long, painful, unforgettable chapter, but she was not the whole book. And maybe, just maybe, telling it now is my way of finally closing the page.